Managed mentoring guide for getting started in beekeeping. Other equipment for your operation. I am Kevin England. The lessons that follow this one are related to management of pests of the honeybee hive, and we'll need to buy some equipment for that. In addition, there's a couple other management practice pieces of equipment that you might want to add to your operation. Obviously, at some point, you need to purchase some honey harvesting and processing equipment along with jars. And there's a couple other additional kit considerations that we'll talk about as we go through this lesson. As noted on the slide earlier in the program, there were a number of times when we talked about equipment you needed to purchase in order to manage your bees. We've come to this part of the program where we get to phase two for that. You need to buy some things in order to maintain your bees through summer and winter. And if you look at it, there's a number of pieces of equipment that you should eventually add to your arsenal. And we'll put them on a someday maybe list or things you need to purchase in your near future. So we're going to run those down in this lesson. In saying this out loud and elaborating on what we were just talking about, you have summer management and varroa management to take care of. You're going to need equipment for that. Honey harvesting and equipment especially for storage of bee equipment over the winter. Most of this recommendation is tied to future management activities of your colonies, and we've tried to organize them so that they make sense as we go through the program. On the continuum of now, someday, consider a possible purchase. This one is a now. We would like you to purchase a Varroa monitoring kit. In the kit, you're going to need 4 pieces of equipment. The first one is some sort of plastic tub, typically like a Rubbermaid tub that you'd buy at Walmart or some sort of kitchen store. A common half cup measure dedicated to the kit. An easy check device. This is made by Vito Pharma. We do prefer that you use this one, although there's a bunch of different versions out on the marketplace. Our instructions always use this one. You can find them in all the beekeeping catalogs. And then you're going to need some sort of solution to wash the bees in an alcohol wash, which is the instruction we'll tell you about. If you're going to buy isopropyl alcohol, do go for the 90+% version, not the 70% one. Although these days, a lot of beekeepers use windshield washer fluid, and we'll cover those choices in a future lesson. Treating varroa mites is a personal preference thing in how you design your plan. In this presentation, we're just simply saying at some point in your future, you're going to have to figure out where to source these materials and the right amount of timing to have them shipped and sent to you. Just keep that in mind as summer progresses, that you will be making purchases. If you monitor and find that your mites are high, you're going to want your treatments to be available at hand, and you should have a plan for this. Another consideration for purchases is the equipment for administration. In the case of oxalic acid, if you're going that route, then you might want to choose which method you're going to use to administer the product. On the slide here, there's 3, starting with the upper right. A wand that you put the powder in. It heats the powder till it sublimates and becomes a vapor. On the bottom right is a vaporizer. It's a special device which has a heat chamber that does the same thing and shoots the vapor into the hive. And on the left-hand side, the syringe is for the dribble method. In the center, you're going to see apibioxyl. That is oxalic acid in powder form specifically for beekeeping. Its purity is guaranteed, and it is registered to be used in beehives. You're not supposed to use any other product in a beehive because of the food aspect of honey. You do not want inordinate contaminants inside your hive, so use the products sold by beekeeping catalogs. And again, if you're choosing oxalic acid as one of your choices, then you're going to have to plan to purchase these pieces of equipment. It should be said that also this equipment requires protective gear, face masks, gloves, and so on. So personal protective equipment comes along with whatever you're choosing here. Small hive beetles are part of the mid-Atlantic experience. Just about everybody in the region encounters them in some way. Typically, they are not that bad for us in specific areas, although there are certain regions within the mid-Atlantic that have small hive beetle problems to the point of catastrophic. You have to have a small hive beetle plan, and part of those plans are having hive beetle traps and other approaches. Do consider that you may have to purchase some of this equipment for your hives, and we'll have a small hive beetle lesson coming up that will give you more information. We recommend that you maintain marked queens in your hives. It makes them easier to find, and it lets you know at a glance if your queen has been replaced. It's a more advanced skill in order to figure out how to pick up a queen and get it marked. So we have not taught you that yet, but at some point when we give that information, we would expect that you might go buy a couple pieces of equipment in order to pull the queen off the frame, put her into a marking devices, and give her a paint job based on the year and color that corresponds to how you should be marking your queens. Again, this will be coming up in a lesson, but for new beekeepers, we generally wait to teach this skill, but you might be looking at buying a paint marker, queen clip, and marking kit sometime in your future. It's pretty customary for beekeepers when they use straps to use ratcheting straps on their hives, and I'm going to talk about that on the next slide. I actually prefer something called the lashing slap. It has a different buckle, and they're simply easier to work with when it comes to opening the hive. And for me, they provide the utility of a lashing strap. I think that some sort of strap is simply needed, and then a simple brick or weight on top of the hive is enough. Now, I've seen my hives knocked over by deer, knock on wood, not by bears, but I know beekeepers who've had bears knock over hives with lashing straps and they hold. Now, if you're in bear territory, you may really want to use a ratcheting strap as it is a more secure method and it may actually prevent a bear from getting into the hive. Now, most simply go with a standard ratchet strap. If you're familiar with these, they are a good choice. If you've never used them, know that sometimes they can be fussy when you're struggling to get them unlatched with bees flying around. Still, if you're looking for the most secure tie-down features, these are your go-to. Hives strapped down in this manner are good enough sometimes, again, to keep bears out of the colony. And for long trips, transporting hives, you have good security knowing that the hives are locked for the trip. And I do use both lashing straps and for full-size bigger colonies, ratcheting straps during transportation. It's your judgment, and you can make that decision that suits you. If there's one piece of equipment that I would put on the now purchase list for you, it would be one of these. These metal benches in this form factor, I'm a huge proponent for these and have several deployed. They're lightweight, easy to move around, weatherproof, and after you have one, you will lament working bees in anybody else's yard without having them present to put your hive equipment down on as you're doing inspections. These often go on sale during Black Friday sales where they cut the price considerably, so keep your eye out, and if you ever get a chance, do purchase some of these for your beekeeping apiary. Queen excluders are a very common piece of equipment in a beekeeping kit, and they're sold in all the beekeeping catalogs. The premise of a queen excluder is that you would put it over the brood chamber, and that would keep queens from coming up through and laying eggs into your honey boxes. This is a common approach for commercial operations, but when it comes to most beekeeping operations, we know that queens, they generally don't go north into the honey boxes, and almost all beekeepers, they just don't use them. Now, there's not to say that there isn't utility for a queen excluder. Sometimes when you have a hive that has a massive colony in two boxes and you're trying to find your queen, you could take one of these, put it between the two boxes, come back in a couple days, and whichever colony box has eggs, you know the queen is in that box, and it makes it a little bit easier to isolate her and find the queen. There's other reasons to have a queen excluder in your management practice, and it's one of those things, it's not a bad idea to have a couple on hand. So maybe in your someday list, consider buying a few of these for your hive operation. This simple shim, which is 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch stock in the shape and dimension of a hive box, is a utility piece that comes in handy for a number of management practices as you work your bees through the year. They're simple to build and inexpensive to buy, and now you can almost find them in all beekeeping catalogs. A couple examples of use: you might put it over top of your brood chamber for varroamite treatments that you place on the top bars. The name Emery shim is named after the late George Emery, who proposed to use these between honey boxes and brood chambers to give the bees an entrance with the little notch where they can come right in through the hole and enter into the honey chamber. Yeah, there's a lot of uses for this utility, and I have a large contingent of these in my yard, and I use them quite frequently for different management practices. We've recommended one of these in the past and have talked about their use in the program, and we'll reiterate it again. A bee brush is just a common piece of utility in a kit for a beekeeper that just about everybody should have. Think about one example is when you harvest a honey box after evacuating it of bees. There's always some strays in there, and you pull a frame that's fully capped with a couple bees walking around, pull out your bee brush, just flick those bees off so they go back to the colony, and you're good to go. I can't picture a beekeeping kit without one of those in there, and if you don't have one, it's a good idea to look at one of these for your future. What's depicted on the slide is one of the more popular these days forms of a robber screen. These are sold in all the beekeeping catalogs. This piece of equipment deserves mention, but it's one of those things that's kind of funny. I have a pile of them on my shelf, and I hardly ever see any reason to deploy them. However, when you get in that one situation where you walk out and you see a hive is being robbed and you're trying to figure out how to mitigate the solution, well, you're going to go grab one of these and you're going to put them on. Now, what I know is that some beekeepers like these so much to prevent robbing in the first place that they run them all year long. I don't know if I'm a great fan of that because it tends to choke down the entrance, and I think it holds your bees back from doing all that they need to come and go for resources, and guard bees generally do a good job at protecting the entrance. Still, if you have a smaller colony or some reason for robbing suspicions, then you might want to put one of these or the many form factors that are out there in the marketplace into play. They make these in plastic. There's simpler versions of them. If you go and search on YouTube, you can find all kinds of variations on the theme for robber screens. These, though, are typically sold in beekeeping catalogs, and you could buy them straight away. We're going to turn the corner and go to the future of honey harvesting. A lot of this is just to show you that this equipment is out there with no recommendations or use at this time, just getting you prepped for the concept that you're going to be in the marketplace at some point to purchase these things. The first considerations are methods to remove honey bees from the boxes so that they go down into the colony and you can pull the boxes to harvest. There's a number of approaches to do this that one can consider. These devices are a common theme. The bees go out of the honey box down into the brood chamber through some form of device, and they can't make their way back in. The top one is an 8-way escape board. The middle one is a triangle escape board, and the porter bee escape goes in a hole of an inner cover that you place between the honey boxes and the brood chamber, and the bees exit through and can't get back in. Again, we'll cover more of how to use these when we get to the honey harvesting lessons. There are alternatives to the bee escape method. One of them is to flood the honey boxes with a repellent odor that makes the bees leave the honey super. These fume board / chemicals work well, but some beekeepers don't like this approach because they're personally repelled, like the bees, from the smell of the chemicals. One product that is used in common marketplace is something called butyric acid, and it has a really odd profile for people. Some people don't mind the smell, and some people just absolutely cannot stand the smell. Now, there's different products out in the marketplace. Fisher's Bee Quick, for example, is one that is said to smell like maraschino cherries and is not so bad. I guess it's one of those things where you have to experiment and decide which is going to work for you, but this is another alternative to get bees out of a honey super for harvesting that may be in your future. When you have your frames successfully pulled and you brought them in to harvest, one of the things you have to do is uncap the honey to put into an extractor. There are a large number of tools out in the marketplace that people have devised. You'll see videos of them on TikTok and Instagram and so on, but quite frankly, in my experience going through with a good number of beekeepers, if you're looking for two pieces of equipment to start in your kit, one of them is an uncapping fork, which is the red device on your screen, and the other is a kitchen utility, a simple bread knife. Universally, when I talk to beekeepers, these are the two most used tools. Now, we'll have a video that shows a large number of different approaches, including some industry tools like hot knives that you can use to cut the comb off, and we'll talk about the pros and cons, and you can make your choices in the future as to how you're going to uncap your honey. Something very familiar to all beekeepers is buckets and filters. When you have the honey coming out of the extractor, you're going to want to remove extraneous wax, any bee parts, and so on. And you typically run them through a series of filters and into a bucket with a gate on it. And then you could use the gate to open and close to fill your honey jars. These two are available in all of the beekeeping catalogs, and obviously the key would be to make sure that you buy food grade plastic. By now, it's likely that you've looked through a beekeeping catalog and you've seen these in there, manual or motorized versions of them. And if you've looked at the prices, they are quite expensive. Your journey to buy an extractor is something that you can figure out on your own. A lot of beekeeping clubs have one or two extractors that they loan to their members, and you could typically just call someone and rent one for the weekend, so to speak. Different clubs make different arrangements for it. One thing that we say about that is we do like that premise because you get to use an extractor and find out whether you do or don't like the version that they have, and maybe that will help you be a better informed consumer if you choose to buy one for your operation. One such thing is when you use a manual one and you have a lot of hives, you'll find out soon enough that motorized ones are worth the cost. Different sizes, different shapes of baskets and other things come into play. And maybe you could also go visit someone who has these and get to see different versions before you consider making an investment. For us personally, we used one for over a decade from the club before we decided to make the large investment and purchase our own. Everyone can go about it whatever way you want to. Like an extractor, these pieces of equipment can become a little bit pricey, but when you use one, you'll understand the utility. On the slide are two versions of uncapping tanks. There are a good number of these out in the marketplace. Originally, when we started beekeeping, we used to uncap over buckets. It was messy, the buckets would fall over. And after securing one of these, we found that they're just a utility that we don't know how we would do without. The way that they're designed is the wooden bar across the top holds the frame securely while you uncap. The cappings fall down into the basket, which has a weave mesh that allows the honey to fall through, and you can open the gate up and extract the honey out of the tank. Yeah, these are a little bit pricey. You're going to find sticker shock on them, but after you use them for a while, I believe you're going to find out that they were worth the investment. Do get a very well designed, strong one. There's cheap ones out in the marketplace that will break under use if you kick them over and knock them around. They do tend to break in storage, so make sure you buy a robust one. We'll cover more about how to use this when we get to the honey harvesting lessons. The instrument you see on the slide is called a refractometer. It's a piece of equipment that a lot of beekeepers generally don't know about, but it should be something that's in everyone's kit. They're relatively inexpensive. They're available at all the online stores like Amazon. And the premise of the device is you put a drop of honey on the screen and it will give you a reading of the moisture content. If you harvested your honey incorrectly, maybe you took some frames that weren't quite ripened, you will get high moisture honey which will ferment in the jar. This is just a good insurance policy to make sure that your honey's at the right moisture level before you consider bottling it. Last piece of equipment to consider for honey harvesting is obviously jars. As the slide says, a lot of times beekeepers get in the habit of keeping every kind of glass jar that they encounter as they recycle things in their kitchen. You can of course go the route of a traditionalist and buy honey jars like this queen line jar from online stores, beekeeping supply houses, and sometimes even clubs sell them as fundraisers. One thing you might want to consider in your someday maybe list is making your own labels. It's a lot of fun to design your labels, stick them to the jars, and hand them out to family and friends. An honorable mention for any beekeeping kit is a swarm lure. Swarm Commander is probably the most popular brand and sold in 3 different forms. You can buy a aerosol spray, a gel liquid, and or a capsule. The premise of this is it has a scent that attracts the bees to a container that you would put out called a swarm trap. A lot of beekeepers just take regular excess hives with a couple frames of comb, preferably brood comb, and set it out in the spring. Give it a couple sprays of Swarm Commander, and if there are any errant swarms in your neighborhood, they will simply move into the equipment. Almost every beekeeper at some point encounters these products and has them in their kit, and it's something you'll put on your someday maybe list. Every beekeeper gets to the point where they have equipment in storage. One of the things that you will end up storing over time is beekeeping comb. The wax moth is a critter that can get into your equipment and take residence and eat that stored comb to the point where it destroys it and it makes an awful mess of your equipment. There's a product sold specifically for beekeeping called Paramoth. It's similar to mothballs, but it is not the same thing, and do not use anything that's not labeled for beekeeping equipment. The premise of this is you would spread this chemical around inside your containers and it creates a persistent odor that will keep the wax moth from entering. More information is available for this, and if you buy the product, make sure you read and adhere to the labels. A lesser known but alternative way to keep wax moth at bay is this yellow colored granule product that has a consistency of powdered yeast. Wax moth eat the microbes and they attach themselves to the lining of the stomach, and in time this results in injury to the wax moth and they will eventually die from the product that they've consumed. Zentari is simply mixed with water and it's sprayed on the comb, and then when the water evaporates, the spores are left behind. These spores are not dangerous to humans and they're not detrimental to honeybees and other beneficial insects. This is a product that was off the market for some period of time. The registration for use had lapsed and recently has come back into play, and you'll find it in some beekeeping catalogs. If you do go this route, it's not hard to use. I have used it with success in my own operation. Just make sure you get a good understanding of that. If you're interested in a little more information about it, you can go to my podcast, The Beekeeper's Corner, episode 110. There was a segment there that goes into more detail and background. Hopefully this lesson has given you food for thought as to some purchases you're going to need to make in your future on behalf of your beekeeping operation. The first thing to say, though, is go buy your varroa monitoring kit covered in the first slide. You're going to need that for the next run of things we'll be doing over the summer. It was always the impression of this lesson plan to have 2 or 3 of these, and we'll probably have another things you should buy come wintertime, especially for second year management practices. As to what comes next, we want to encourage you to do good record keeping. That's a lesson coming through, and we'll enter into a mini series about varroa mites to get you up to speed on the basics of That as a pest along with small hive beetles. That's going to take us to summer management and the all-important concept of rearing healthy bees in summer and fall so that your colony will overwinter. If you have questions about what we covered, you can come to the online session and ask in that forum. You can also send an email to the email address on the screen. If you're watching from YouTube, you can leave a comment below. Incidentally, if you're on our website and hover over the video, there'll be a link to click to go to YouTube, and when you get there, please do subscribe. Thanks for watching the lesson. We'll catch you next time when we move to Hive Tools.